Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of Polity Research's podcast, The Polling Station. My name's Ernie Paikopoulos, CEO of Polity, and I'll once again be your host today. Our topic today is one that's been in the headlines now for a while. It's the ongoing conflict between the State of Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which, as you probably all remember, started with a horrific October 7th attack by Hamas into Israeli territory that killed over 1,200 people, most of them civilians. And now, believe it or not, we're going on, I guess, almost 4 months that this conflict has been going on. And once again, we are here with fellow pollster David Williams. Dave is president of Williams and Associates, a polling firm based in Salem, Massachusetts. And the reason I asked Dave to come on the podcast today is because he has direct experience working in Gaza as well as the West Bank between the years 2004 and 2007, off and on. So he can bring a unique and informed perspective on the situation there. So Dave, welcome, my friend, again to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Ernie. Has it really been 10 podcasts? This is the anniversary of.
10 podcasts, and you should be, in the Hall of Fame, the Polling Station Hall of Fame, because I think you've been in at least half of them. But maybe we should, we're on this 40-minute Zoom limit, so we should get right to the issue. Let's dispense with the preliminary, shall we?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
All right. What are you drinking today, Dave?
I'm drinking some. I had some Twinings Earl Grey tea, a little bit of honey and some milk to go along with it.
You always have a unique and innovative drink to bring to the table. Thank you. Thank you. I'm boring as usual with my Pete's Major Dickinson's Blend Dark Roast Decaf, black no sugar. Although I do, Dave, have a new mug.
Oh,
And it's a handmade mug
very nice.
that a friend and former colleague who's a potter handmade for me. So
Very nice.
something new at least.
There you go. I like it. I
Thank
like
you.
it.
Yeah. All right, let's get right to it. Dave, why don't you begin by telling us exactly when you worked in Gaza in the West Bank, the types of projects you were working on there, and the organization that you were working with over there.
Sure. I guess I started working there, a couple of years before the election, working for the International Republican Institute, which is one of the two democracy institutes that came out of the National Endowment for Democracy. They're now funded by USAID, but NED was originally started by Ronald Reagan after he and Margaret Thatcher got together and decided that and didn't decide, I should say, but we're talking about the funding that was needed at the fall of the Soviet Union. So sometime in like 1990, the late 80s, early 90s, they got together and they wanted to provide some funding and expertise to opposition parties that were mostly center right at that point in time, coming out of the fall of the Soviet Empire. So we started working there. I did a lot of work in Central and Eastern Europe, and then the money kind of at Central and Eastern Europe kind of got boiled down and started working out, although that's not really has kind of flared up once again, obviously, as a subject of a past polling station.
Yes.
But the money started moving east, and so we kind of moved along with it. And one of the things that we did was a series of polls in West Bank and Gaza, and actually we did an exit poll that, as I think I mentioned in my email, didn't turn out quite as we'd hoped.
Yeah.
But the parts of it were good and parts of it were bad, so it was a little difficult. So we did I worked there, I think, about 3 or 4 years. We're in and out doing research with a local partner there.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point in time, we went into Gaza. Probably, it was not a very common thing, particularly for Americans to do. But in 2005, right before the elections, we were there preparing for the exit poll, and then We did some election observation work during the election, but that was all in West Bank.
Hmm. So you mentioned before the election, you mean the 2006 election that brought Hamas to power in Gaza, that one? Or
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation there, Ernie. They have 132 seats in their what used to be their parliament. Obviously, it's completely split now, and half of the seats were divided proportionally, and half of the seats were elected district wide.
hmm,
So our surveys, and I think most of the other surveys, actually had Fatah, which was sort of the Abbas's group,
the PLO
the
basically.
former PLO. We had them roughly equal with, roughly equal with Hamas
Hmm.
for the proportional side. And it turns out that it was right about that. I think Fatah got about 41.5% of the vote, something like that, and Hamas got about 44.5, something along those lines. But in the district votes where they were, voting for actual individuals and not for parties at that point in time, Fatah actually got creamed.
Hmm.
They took only 17 of the 66 seats,
Hmm.
and Hamas took the 45. I just had to check my numbers. So there was an incredible split. We had the proportional right, but we did not have the district ones correct. We thought they were going to run about even, as the proportional did, but Hamas was very good, and they basically just really outworked Fatah in terms of getting, particularly in those districts where they were strong, getting their people out to vote. And that was the problem as we see it now, is that there should have been some power sharing going on, but
Hmm.
there was none. And Fatah basically took the West Bank, and Hamas basically took Gaza. So it's kind of strange when people talk about a two-state solution. There really is no two states there. It would have to be a three-state solution,
Yeah,
because Gaza
exactly.
and West Bank are not
They're not
in
connected for one
law.
thing, right?
They're
They're
not
not
connected
physically connected.
either through any kind of commerce or through any kind of politics.
And I imagine over the decades, with that separation and with all, the issues in Gaza as well, that separate cultures, I'm sure, have grown up over the decades in both the West Bank and Gaza. How do
Yeah, I
expect?
yeah no, I mean, I think that's a very astute observation, because West Bank is very much commercially connected
Yeah,
to Israel.
Israel.
Um, you know, some facts that are out there, that when the Israelis built the wall that they refer to as a fence, that it is a wall. Most of the concrete came from a Palestinian contractor in the West Bank. So
Interesting.
there's
Interesting.
that commercial tie that they have going back and forth that they don't have with Gaza. And for all of the problems in Gaza have been exacerbated by the fact that the Israelis pretty much control what goes in and what goes out of Gaza. So
Right. Right.
they do have economic blockades. Gaza actually is a very beautiful spot on the Mediterranean. I was looking to see if I can pull up some pictures, and I'll continue to do that, but I'm having a little bit of difficulty finding them, and we can share. But it's right on the Mediterranean. It's an absolutely gorgeous spot, but it's just fraught with all of this militant action going on there.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's only 140 square miles. I was,
Mhm.
preparing for this. I was shocked that it was that small an area.
Yeah.
And now, one other question I have for you: when Hamas was running in that election in 2006, what was the popular perception of them? They weren't seen as a terrorist group at the time, obviously, right? They were.
No, they were.
I don't know.
Yeah. They were much more militant, and a lot of this revolves around money. There's a lot of international funds flowing in and out of the West Bank and Gaza, and have been for years. And the leadership there has benefited financially from it. Again, the three leaders that we hear most about in Hamas aren't actually in Gaza. They're in,
Right.
they're
Doha somewhere,
at
right?
Qatar, and they are phenomenally wealthy,
Yeah.
as Abbas is, and as their predecessors at the PLO were as well. So there's a lot of money kind of moving back and forth, and there's a determination there on why they clutch to power so significantly as they can. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's very tiny. It's not very big at all. And it's been built up since when I was there in 2005. It was still the Israelis still occupied it. It's really not there. It is a misstatement to refer to the Palestinian territories as occupied, because the Israelis basically have gotten out as much as, officially, governmentally. Again, it's problematic because there are still settlements going on in Palestinian territories,
Yeah.
but that's that's a different subject. Um,
Because they didn't the Israelis leave around the time you were there, right? 2005. They pulled out all the stuff.
They pretty much pulled out so that the Palestinians could have some sort of self-determination.
Now, you have a unique ability to answer this question, because I think most Westerners really have no idea about a lot of things related to the Palestinian situation and Gaza. One thing is how most Palestinians think politically. So you were doing polling.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see any particular strains one way or another in terms of radicalism or moderation, or what was the sweet spot in terms of what was the greatest percentage of people? How would you characterize them politically at that time?
Well, yeah, I would, politically they're moderates. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't, this is, it's a group of people who have, dealt with the Israelis for, generations now, decades. Aside from religion, they share a number of very similar, I don't want to say traits, but, activities in terms of, food requirements, so on and so forth. There are very stringent regulations on, dietary restrictions that they follow. There's dress restrictions. If you look at some very conservative Israelis, it's almost identical to very conservative, people of the Islamic faith. They
Yep.
have to get their heads covered. They grow beards. Their women aren't allowed outside of after dark. They always have to be accompanied by a male member of the family. So it's most of the Palestinian people were moderates. They just want to get along just like everybody else.
Right.
But there's a segment of that group that, are just militant, and they've been
Yeah.
militarized.
Right. But a lot of the narrative that I've been hearing on both sides actually is that today, or let's say before October 7th, the majority of people in Gaza were supportive of Hamas. Do you think that's true? I mean, you haven't been there in a while, but do you think that's
Yeah,
true?
I don't really think that. To some degree, it's true. One reason why we believe during the analysis of the survey work that we did, that Hamas did so well. They did particularly well among women,
Hmm.
which is from our perspective is kind of it's curious. Why
Ironic. Yeah.
why would a very conservative religious group be supported by women who have a tendency to put them into a subservient position in their society? But the fact of the matter was, Hamas did a very interesting thing. Healthcare is a very big issue everywhere, but particularly there where there's very little healthcare.
Yeah.
Hamas had set up sort of extra governmental healthcare facilities, particularly for young women in childbearing years who are going into labor, so on and so forth. So they saw a need and they filled it. And that, from a political standpoint, was the interesting thing to us, is
Hmm.
that aside from the larger issues of peace and prosperity, they were actually on the ground doing things that benefited the local populace.
Pretty
And
savvy
that's why,
campaigning, right?
yeah, and it's all politics is local,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
is a well-known old saw that we go through, a lot. But they saw that need, and they filled it, and they were rewarded by it. However, I think if you went in today and were able to actually talk to people honestly,
Hmm.
which is a difficult thing to do
Yeah.
in this situation because someone's always listening, to what people. So they're very cautious. I think they would be about much more so than they were, God, it's hard to believe it's almost 20 years ago now. But I think if you got them, they would tell you they're tired of it has not benefited them at all. They're tired of the infighting. I think they just want to live peacefully like everybody else does there.
Yeah, and you sort of see that in some of the limited kind of footage that's coming out of Gaza. You see people kind of railing against Hamas and, talking about a return to normalcy. You see that a little bit on the fringes, but
Hmm.
it's hard to, as you say, it's hard to say whether that's a mainstream view or because nobody can get in there and do a survey or do any kind
Right.
of research. One of the other narratives that has come out is that, because of I know refugee is kind of a loaded word, but because of their refugee status, essentially,
Hmm.
the Palestinians, and their history, that they haven't really developed a culture, getting back to that word culture, they haven't developed a culture that can lay the foundation for the kind of representative government that we all think is the ideal here in the
Hmm.
West. Um, and, I'm a little troubled with that, but what do you think? Is that a fair assessment, or is really that just, Westerners imposing our template of democracy on a people who may or may not fit with?
Right. Well, in some respects, it's a lot like places, and particularly in South Central Eastern Europe, like Macedonians or the Bulgarians or the Montenegrins, who they have a shared identity, yet they all feel that they are superior to the other person that you're talking to.
Right.
Because the Macedonians, obviously, through Alexander, had everything from the Aegean all the way over to India. And the Bulgarians claim the same thing, and the Montenegrins also. So it's difficult when you're in an area where there's been so much churning of the culture, and so much of it has been imposed by the West.
Right.
It's been happening there since World War One.
Balfour Declaration, right? Yeah.
The rise of the Sauds in Saudi Arabia, the Jordanians, the Hussein family in Jordan were actually they were on the Arabian Peninsula, and
Hmm.
after World War One, someone decided that they wanted the Saudis to run that whole peninsula, and they moved the Hashemites to Jordan,
Yep.
which is kind of a weird thing because anyway, this get much more complex than we have in 40
And
minutes.
just if I can interrupt it, and also some people claim that Palestinians really are just Jordanians, right?
Well, the Jordanians ran Palestine,
Yeah.
under the British protectorate. I was in Jerusalem, right outside Jerusalem, barely on the fringes of Jerusalem as you're getting ready to go into the West Bank. There's this hillside, and the top is leveled, and you can see the I want to say remnants, but it was never completed of this fairly majestic building up there. And so I was talking to our cab driver, who, by the way, is a Palestinian. He lives in Israel, but he's a Palestinian. And he was saying, "Oh, that's King Hussein's house that never got finished
Huh.
because the UN resolution came through creating Israel, so on and so forth. So and the only people who really seem to want to, we did do a refugee study for the State Department at one point in time where we were interviewing Palestinian refugees in the refugee camps. They're not really camps as we know them. They're basically more like they're slums, basically.
Right.
It's probably
Mostly in the West Bank, right?
West Bank, in Jordan, and in
Lebanon.
we did a couple in Lebanon. So Lebanon, Jordan, and in the West Bank. And the Lebanese were not excited about having more Palestinians in their country. I think that's probably the best way to put it. The only group that was really outside of West Bank and Gaza that was really interested were the Jordanians,
Hmm.
because I think they do have that shared identity. So I think your point is correct that I think the Jordanians see the Palestinians as Jordanians,
Yeah.
and the Palestinians to some degree see the same thing.
Well, when you mentioned that we did a couple of podcast episodes on the Ukrainian situation,
Hmm.
based on your experience there. And one of the things we did toward the end of one of those podcasts was, I think the first one, which was just after the invasion by the Russians. I asked you how long you thought it would last. And you said, honestly, I think years. And we're coming up now on 2 years, right? At the
Hmm.
end of this month.
Yep.
So you're absolutely right about that. So I'm curious about whether now you raised this connection to Jordan, but there's also been discussion in terms of, the day after. How do they clean up the situation in Gaza? Who
Hmm.
participates? Who pays for it? Can it be resolved at all? So I guess I want to ask you, first of all, how long do you think it could last, or even if it can get resolved? And then who would be some of the partners who could come into play? Because I don't think the West is going to be a legitimate partner in trying to rebuild things there. Um,
Well, they probably will be, Ernie, because that's about where the only pot of money is, unless the powers in the Mideast decide that they want to actually come in and do something, which is, I think, just probably very unlikely because of the complications there. You have the Iranians backing basically Hamas and all of these other militant groups as a way of exercising their supremacy over not only the Saudis but over the Turks and over the Egyptians as well. So it just gets so weirdly complicated there. That I think there will be some of that happening because in the long run, I think they see it in their best interest. But when I was there, it was very strange because when I was there, USAID was funneling money into building roads in both West Bank and Gaza.
mhm.
The Israeli Defense Forces would go in, who are basically the Israeli military is funded almost exclusively by the United States.
Yeah.
They would go in there and they'd tear up the roads. And then USAID would go back in and they'd build new roads again. So it was such an odd, thing to see. Well, you see these USAID signs up everywhere talking about how many miles of roads they were building.
Yeah.
I think that the disruption that potentially is called by the decrease in the flow of oil
Yeah.
from the Mideast is going to continually have the U.S. And the Western powers involved there to some degree, and it's probably going to end up. It's been like Bosnia. Bosnia is another failed state that's being propped up by money from the West. That's the only thing that's keeping them going.
Yep.
And the peace in Bosnia may end very soon. It's the same exact situation in West Bank, Gaza, and Israel. And I think the Israelis and I think the result of what happened on October 6th is a clear indication that the Israelis do think that things will settle out at some point in time and that they can live as neighbors
Right.
because I think they completely left their guard down. Thinking, okay, they'll make some noise, but no one's actually ever going to do anything that's going to really, hit us as badly as it hit them, in October. And, the Israelis are tired of it. I think the Palestinians are tired of it. And it's just I think if things had gone the way they should have gone after the 2006 election, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
If Gaza had not split off from the West Bank, if they had found some sort of political solution to keep them going, I think the Israelis would have started to allow, um, you know, flights going. There's an airport in Gaza, but no one can
Yeah.
use it because the
Right.
Israelis won't let anybody go in there. Um, so
So
it's
I hear
a
what you're
very odd
saying.
thing.
I hear what you're saying about the other actors in the Middle East is that, Sunni Shia split, right? That's going to explains everything over there, basically.
Hmm.
Um, do you think there's a similar permanent kind of split between, Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and whoever decides whoever, I mean, can a reconstituted Palestinian Authority be credible, you think, in Gaza? It has to be.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think if they stopped being sort of this if they could stop the corruption and actually start money flowing downhill,
Yeah.
all the I mean billions of dollars flow into that region, and Lord knows what the hell happens to most of it. It goes into somebody's pocket, and again, if you look at Yasser Arafat was a billionaire when he died. He had, houses in Paris and in London, not small houses, not pied a terres, but, pretty big things. So, it's a clientelism that is really destroyed. And when they get to the point where they can eliminate that piece of it,
Yeah.
and so, average everyday Palestinians can actually enjoy the benefit of a peaceful, economically secure environment. I don't think the Israelis would have any problem with it, and I don't think the Palestinians would have a problem with the Israelis. Right.
Yeah. Well, again, what I've seen is some reporting that, there are a large share of Palestinians who, they sort of base their feelings on that old UN resolution 194 that basically said that they could come back to their homes, that they had to leave after 1948. The right of return kind of thing. And there are stories that, first of all, people still have the keys to their homes.
Mm-hmm.
They really feel that someday it's going to happen, and that they would be more, as you say, be more than willing to live side by side with Israelis in a peaceful way.
Mm-hmm.
But there seem to be so many hurdles, particularly the political ones in Israel, I would think, as long as Likud is in power, that would prevent that, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that and it's always amazed me. I'm going to go on a rant here. Stop me if I start running out of time. But I remember in the 1950s, the American Political Science Association thought we should get rid of the congressional form of government that we have and move to a parliamentary system.
Yes.
And they always claim that you could have if you look at England. England has a parliamentary system and it runs just fine. And the deciding factor was that English, at least at that point, and pretty much still do, had two strong political parties, and that was what held everything together. Again, it's the consensus is made before the election validates that consensus on one side or the other, and you move forward. In parliamentary systems where you have a completely fractured environment, that consensus has to be put together after the election.
Right.
So that people don't really know what they're voting for in terms of, what public policy is going to be. And again, the retort that I always remember is, that the Italians have had 156 separate governments at the end of World War II. And so that's not a real good example of a functioning parliamentary system. And, you've seen cases where the Israelis have had an election and then the government falls 10, 20 days after the election, they have to have another one. Right. And so you get these weird, amalgamation of center right and then just extremely far right parties coming together.
Yep.
And unless, some horse trading goes on, they can't get any work done. Any good policy done. But, most of there are Palestinians, who are residents of Israel.
Sure.
They do very well. There is a Palestinian party that has seats in the Knesset.
Yep.
So I think when people outside of Israel, West Bank and Gaza can see what's happening with the Palestinians who actually are in Israel, I would think, and this, obviously communication that goes back and forth because of the familial relations, so on and so forth. You got to figure that the average Palestinian is just tired of this. Yep. And, there have been strides made in terms of the right to return policy where, monetary, settlements have been made. But yeah, as long as Israel has got this really fractured Knesset, it doesn't make anything easier. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I may be wrong on the number, but I think 20% of the Israeli population, 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab citizens.
Yeah.
Actually, citizens of Israel. So that's separate and distinct from the Palestinians who may not be citizens who also live on
Right.
Israeli territory.
Right.
So it's
And like I said, work there, they do very well. It's a functioning economy there that, like everywhere needs people to work in it. And,
well,
so
that was the I guess Netanyahu is being criticized now for basically allowing people from Gaza, right, to come on work permits, day permits to come
Mhm.
work in Israel.
Yeah.
And that is kind of
Well,
part of the
there's
problem.
been, I was, it's one interesting story that I got there. I was coming out of the Eretz. So I was in Gaza. We were coming out of Gaza, going back to Jerusalem, and there's one big there's like three, I think, big border crossings, and one is Eretz. It's called a northern part just outside of Gaza City. And right beside it is a huge Israeli industrial park that is now pretty much closed. But something like, 50 or 60,000 Palestinians every day went from Gaza across the border into this industrial park to work. And we were coming out, and the road had been torn up. Uh, and it was a kind of a dirt path that you were on. So I'm in a taxi with a Palestinian guy who was doing all the survey work for us, and another individual from the States, who worked for IRI. And as we're coming towards the border, we meet another cab coming the other way, and the cab driver rolls down his window and says the border crossing is closed. They're not letting any people through because there'd been a Palestinian incursion the night before, and 3 people were killed. There were bullet holes everywhere, and so the other cab driver said, "Well, you got Westerners with you, so they'll probably let you through." It was like a 4-hour ordeal for us to get through. There was no one at the border. There was us and probably 5 other people from the UN, and it took us 4 hours to get through. We had to wait, had to wait, had to wait. They let a couple people through, and then we had to wait, and another couple people went through, and you walk through this very long, uh, you know, exit way, which is probably about a half a mile long or something. And there's 2 checkpoints in between. We were waiting there, waiting there. They let a few people through. And the funny thing was, it's not that funny, but we got stopped there's an outpost, probably about maybe 20 yards off of this dirt road, an
Mm,
Israeli outpost.
mm.
And they got a megaphone there telling us to stop. Can't see anything. It's just all, kind of bunkerish kind of thing. So, one of the guys said, the other American said to me, "Why don't you get out and show them that we're Americans?" And which I did. And then later thought, why am
Yeah.
I getting out? What the hell was I thinking? So I get out, I get my hands up, and, I'm showing them, hey, we're just trying to get back. And
To get in? Did you?
well, we're speaking, I got back in the car and I said, I think they said cab okay. And the guy I was with said, now, did they say cab
Yeah.
okay?
Make
Or
sure.
did they not say cab okay? And I said, I don't know. So because it's a heavily accented Israeli soldier, like at a Burger
Mm,
King
mm.
takeout thing, couldn't really hear it. So our note was we just drive very slowly and see what
Yeah.
happens. If anybody fires, we stop. So eventually we did get out.
So we're almost out of time. So I want to, before we get cut off, do you generally have an optimistic or pessimistic view of whether Gaza can be resuscitated and turned into a legitimate, functioning polity, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think there is a possibility for a 2-state solution, but the Palestinians have got to figure that out for themselves, and that's the difficult part. I think the Israel's doing, I think, the proper thing in trying to eradicate Hamas from Gaza, and that way maybe they can get a new start, a fresh start. They haven't had elections since 2006,
I
so you
know.
can see where things are going. And so the public has not been able to voice any preference whatsoever on what they want to do. But I'm always an optimist, and I think it's
You are.
going to
You always
happen.
have been.
It's
Yes.
just a matter of when and what exactly.
And the last thing is, how long do you think this particular conflict in Gaza is going to last before they can have some kind of a ceasefire or some kind of a mop-up operation?
I don't think it's going to be too long. I'd say months,
Okay. Okay.
probably longer than weeks, but I think it's unsustainable right now in terms of the Israelis being in there, public opinion wise, that, not only the money that they're spending doing it, but the outrage coming from the international community. I think is going to put pressure on them quietly. And I think the Israelis won't say that's the reason, but they'll come to some end.
Okay, we got to end it. Thank you, Dave Williams, for coming on again. This was fascinating, just as I expected. You gave us tremendous perspective. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and hope to see you at the next episode of The Polling Station. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you, Ernie. We'll talk to you later.
Take care.